The Vorrkai Collective had a saying, roughly translated from our tongue clicks and pressure hisses into your language. It goes something like this: strike the nest once and the insects scatter. We had used that philosophy for 11,000 years. We struck nests. Things scattered. The galaxy more or less operated according to our schedule. Then we found humans. Now I want to be absolutely clear about something before we get into the catastrophic, civilization-ending, deeply embarrassing series of events I am about to describe. The Vorrkai are not stupid. We are, by most galactic metrics, one of the most analytically gifted species to ever achieve spaceflight. We mapped 43 star systems before most species figured out that fire could be used for something other than warming food. We built gravitational shear weapons before your ancestors built the wheel. I mention this not to boast, but because what happened next requires you to understand that the Vorrkai had every reason, every logical, data-supported reason to believe we were making a sound tactical decision. We were not making a sound tactical decision. It started with the Peller system. A modest star, yellowish, unremarkable, orbiting nothing particularly interesting except one blue-green planet and a handful of rocky satellites the humans had apparently gotten bored and started punching infrastructure into. Our long-range survey ships cataloged the system in the 42nd year of what we called the expansion push, a period where the collective was aggressively mapping and flagging habitable or resource-rich zones for eventual acquisition. The Peller system flagged positive on 3 resource categories: deep core iridium deposits on the third moon, trace palladium in the asteroid belt, and a rather lovely vein of cosmium running through the planet's upper mantle that our geologist practically wept over. There was, of course, the matter of the inhabitants. Admiral Drex, full name unpronounceable in your alphabet. Just know it involved a sound like a wet boot being pulled from thick mud. Reviewed the preliminary report with the calm, professional detachment that had earned him his rank. He pulled up the human data files. Bipedal, oxygen-breathing, moderately spacefaring. They had colonies on 3 of their system's moons and were apparently attempting something on the 4th. Average lifespan, roughly 80 years, which Drex found almost endearingly brief. Their military technology was, according to the survey report, nascent but spirited, which in Vorrkai intelligence language translates to, "They have guns and enthusiasm, but nothing that should concern us." Drex approved the operation in about 40 minutes. The target was a human installation on Peller's third moon, the one sitting right on top of our iridium deposit. It was a mid-sized base, designated by human records as Outpost Ferron-7. Population, according to intercepted communications, approximately 260 personnel. Mining crews, support staff, a small garrison of soldiers. Nothing special. In Vorrkai terms, it was the kind of installation you clear out before breakfast and have the extraction equipment running by lunch. Commander Velis led the strike. She was young for her rank, ambitious, technically brilliant, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes from having never once been surprised by an enemy. She brought 4 warships. 4. For a base of 260 people on a moon with no orbital defenses worth mentioning, she later said in her debriefing, the one where she had to explain to a review board why she had caused a war with a species none of us were remotely prepared for, that she had brought the 4 ships as a precaution. Standard protocol. You always bring more than you need. She probably should have brought more than 4 ships. The strike on Outpost Ferron-7 took 11 minutes. Velis's ships dropped from transit space at the edge of the moon's minimal gravity well, painted the base with targeting locks, and opened fire before the human garrison had time to do more than scramble to defensive positions. The base's shields, modest, civilian-grade, the kind designed to deflect micrometeorites and solar radiation rather than Vorrkai kinetic lances, collapsed in seconds. The structures followed. Velis watched her tactical display with professional satisfaction as the thermal signatures winked out one by one. What she did not watch, because it did not seem important at the time, was the single emergency transmission that punched out of Ferron-7 in the 9 seconds between when her ships were detected and when the communications array was destroyed. 9 seconds. Long enough for one automated distress beacon to burn a signal through the local relay network. Coordinates, attack signature, last recorded images from the base's external cameras, and send it screaming toward the blue-green planet below. Valis filed her report. Drex reviewed it. The collective noted the successful preliminary action in the Peller system and began scheduling extraction equipment deployment. Nobody worried about the distress beacon. This, as I must stress with the full weight of 11,000 years of Vorrkai analytical tradition behind me, was a mistake. The first indication that something was wrong came 14 days later, when the advance mining convoy entering the Peller system encountered a human vessel. Not a warship, or rather, not what we classified as a warship. It was a large, battered-looking cargo transport, the kind humans apparently used for interplanetary freight. It was sitting directly in the convoy's flight path, doing nothing aggressive, just sitting there. The convoy's lead ship hailed it. Standard procedure. What came back was not a response to the hailing frequency. What came back was a voice, one human voice, speaking in the crude translation protocol our survey teams had assembled from intercepted broadcasts. The voice was calm, almost conversational. The convoy's communications officer, a young analyst named Ferris who had never spoken to a human before, described it later as the voice of someone explaining to you why they are about to do something very bad, with complete sincerity. The human said, "This system is closed. Turn around." The convoy's captain, Orvend, was not an unreasonable being. He was also not, however, someone who took instructions from lone cargo freighters. He replied that the Vorrkai Collective had established claim to the Peller system's resources under Galactic Expansion Protocol, and that the human presence would need to be relocated. He was polite about it. Orvend was always polite. There was a pause. Then the human voice said, "I need you to understand something. You killed 243 people on Ferron-7. Engineers, geologists, a cook, 3 people who were on their first off-world posting. We are not relocating." Orvend was still being polite when the cargo freighter opened up panels along its hull that had not shown on any scan, because apparently humans have developed a remarkable talent for making things not show on scans, and revealed weapons that absolutely should not have fit inside a vessel that size. Ferris later described the next 45 seconds as very loud and then very quiet. The convoy turned around. 2 ships did not make it far enough to turn around. Back in Vorrkai Collective space, Admiral Drex received this report with considerably less calm than he had displayed while approving the original strike. He called an emergency session of the Expansion Command, which was a group of 8 very senior, very experienced military minds who had between them overseen 63 planetary acquisitions without a single significant complication. The session lasted 6 hours. The problem, as laid out by Intelligence Chief Sovan, a being so old his secondary eyes had gone entirely gray, was this. The humans had apparently been watching the Peller system since the distress beacon arrived. They had been running dark, low signature, their vessels configured to minimize the energy output that Vorrkai sensors were calibrated to detect. While the collective was scheduling mining equipment, the humans had been doing something else entirely. They had been counting the ships in the convoy, counting the deployment timelines, counting, Sovan said with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing personally offensive, the number of Vorrkai vessels currently stationed within transit range of the Peller system. They assessed our response capability, Sovan said, before we assessed theirs. Drex stared at him. They had 14 days. Yes, we have been gathering intelligence on species for 11,000 years. I am aware, and in 14 days, with what amounts to a fishing vessel and a distress beacon, they— Admiral? Sovan placed both sets of hands flat on the table in the gesture that meant he was about to say something extremely unpleasant. The vessel that destroyed 2 units of the convoy was not a warship. It was not a military vessel of any classification in our databases. It was a privately operated freight transport that had, we believe, been retrofitted in approximately 12 days by its owner and crew. He paused. The owner's name, according to the registration, is a human called Brecka Volund. She appears to be 41 years old, and her previous occupation was hauling construction materials between Peller's second and third moons. The room was very quiet. A construction materials hauler, Drex said. Who lost a sister at Ferron-7, Sovan said. More quiet. Drex pulled up the broader intelligence picture. Everything Sovan's teams had assembled in the 2 weeks since the strike, which was not enough but was already alarming. The humans had, in response to the attack on Ferron-7, done several things simultaneously. They had filed formal notification of hostilities with the Galactic Compact, which was a largely ceremonial body that nobody took very seriously, but which meant the engagement was now officially on record. They had recalled approximately 40% of their civilian space fleet from various postings throughout the Peller system and surrounding territories. And they had, according to signals intelligence that Sovan's team was still trying to fully decrypt, sent something to every human colony in a 6-system radius. Not orders, not evacuation instructions, not defensive posture commands. Volunteers. They are asking for volunteers, Drex said slowly, reading the partial translation. Every human with a ship, a weapon, or a particular grievance, Sovan confirmed. And apparently quite a few of them have all three. Drex leaned back. He had fought 12 wars. He had overseen the acquisition of worlds. He had, on one memorable occasion, negotiated the peaceful surrender of an entire species over the course of a single afternoon. He understood conflict. He understood escalation. What he was looking at did not fit any model he had ever used. What is their actual military force? He asked. Not civilian conversions. Their standing fleet. Sovan pulled up a display. The numbers were not, on the surface, frightening. The human consolidated defense fleet was smaller than 3 of the Vorrkai Collective's 7 regional armadas. Their ships were individually less powerful. Their strategic doctrine, as far as Sovan's team could analyze it, was defensive in orientation, built around protecting their existing colonies rather than projecting force outward. So they are defending, Drex said. Good. Defensive posture means they know they cannot. Admiral? Sovan interrupted him, which he almost never did. Look at the other column. Drex looked at the other column. It listed total registered spacecraft in human-controlled space. Military, commercial, private, research, salvage, transit, mining, agricultural, construction, everything that moved under human operation and could, theoretically, be pointed in a direction and told to go there. The number was considerably larger than the Vorrkai Collective's combined active fleet. Not slightly larger, not marginally larger, considerably larger. They have that many ships? Drex said. They are a spacefaring species that colonized 3 moons and an asteroid belt before we noticed them, Sovan said. They have been building and flying things for a long time. The military fleet is what they keep armed. Everything else is what they can arm, given motivation and approximately 12 days, if a construction materials hauler named Brecka Volund is any indication. Drex stared at the number for a long time. Then, very quietly, he said, "What did we do to them at Ferron-7?" Sovan did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was flat and careful in the way of someone reading facts they find uncomfortable. 243 confirmed dead. 43 of them were under the age of 25 by human reckoning. 11 were what humans classify as civilian contract workers, with no military affiliation. The base commander, a human named Osei Tamboli, was found by their recovery teams still at his post. A pause. He had apparently been attempting to send a second distress beacon when the array was destroyed. The room was very, very quiet. Drex said, "I approved the strike in 40 minutes. Nobody responded to that. Get me a full tactical projection," he said finally. "All scenarios. And get me a communications line to whatever human authority is currently." He stopped, reconsidered. Are they coming to us, or are we going to them? Sovan looked at him with those gray, ancient eyes. "Admiral," he said, "I believe they are already coming to us." The first human fleet arrived at the edge of Vorrkai-controlled space in 31 days, not their military fleet. That is the part that kept Drex awake at night, staring at the tactical display in his command quarters while his advisors cycled through projections he did not like. The consolidated defense fleet had not moved. It was sitting, perfectly still, in a formation around the Peller system and the adjacent colonies, shields up, weapons hot, doing exactly what a defensive fleet is supposed to do, defending. What arrived at the edge of Vorrkai space was everything else. Sovan had been right about the volunteers, what none of them had fully anticipated. And I say this as someone reviewing the intelligence reports with the particular agony of hindsight, was the speed. 31 days. The humans had taken 11 minutes to lose Ferron-7, 14 days to retrofit a freight hauler into something that destroyed 2 Vorrkai warships, and 31 days to assemble what the Collective's border station commander Failed described, in a transmission that arrived with notable urgency, as an uncountable number of vessels of varying size, configuration, and apparent origin, approaching on a broad front at inconsistent speeds, which I believe is somehow more alarming than a coordinated formation would be. Drex pulled up Fail's visual feed. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, to nobody in particular, "Why are some of them different colors?" Sovan, who had apparently anticipated this question, had an answer ready. "They are from different colonies, different operators, different builders. Some appear to be corporate vessels. Several have markings consistent with what human cultural databases classify as sports teams. That green and orange one in the forward cluster belongs, according to registration data, to an organization called the Peller Mining Consortium. They appear to have sent their entire commercial fleet." A pause. "The humans do not appear to have a uniform. They have a sports team in a war fleet. Multiple, we believe." Drex closed the visual feed. He opened it again. He closed it again. He sat in the particular silence of a being who has spent 11,000 years of civilization, believing they understood how conflict worked, encountering evidence to the contrary. The fleet, if you could call it that, it was more like a migration of extremely angry people all heading in the same direction, had stopped just outside Vorrkai territorial boundary markers, not crossed them, stopped at them, which meant they knew where the markers were, which meant they had done their research, which meant this was deliberate. They were waiting. A hail came through 20 minutes later, not on a military frequency, on the general commercial broadcast band, the kind used for shipping lane coordination and trade negotiations. Drex almost missed it because his communications team was monitoring military channels. The voice was different from the one Ferris had described at Peller. That voice had been calm, focused, the voice of someone with a specific and immediate purpose. This voice was older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. It introduced itself as Admiral General Priya Okafor, commanding the Human Consolidated Response, which Drex noted was a title and a mission designation that had apparently been created within the last month specifically for this situation. She said, "I am going to say this once, clearly, because I want there to be no confusion about what we want and why we are here. You attacked Outpost Ferron-7 without warning or declaration. You killed 243 people who were not soldiers, were not threatening you, and were not given the opportunity to evacuate or surrender. We want acknowledgement of that act, full reparations to the families of those killed, and a permanent withdrawal from the Peller system and all adjacent territories. We are prepared to negotiate the terms. We are also prepared not to." Drex looked at Sovan. Sovan looked at Drex. She said that last sentence very calmly, Drex observed. "Humans often say the most alarming things very calmly," Sovan replied. "I have begun to think it is cultural." The expansion command met again. It was a shorter session this time, not because the situation was simpler, but because several of the positions that had seemed reasonable a month ago had become considerably harder to defend when there was a multicolored armada of furious humans parked at the territorial boundary. The debate broke along predictable lines. The younger commanders wanted to meet the fleet with force, arguing that allowing a species to dictate terms to the collective would set a catastrophic precedent. The older ones, the ones with gray in their secondary eyes like Sovan, kept bringing up the number. The one in the second column, the total registered spacecraft number. It was Fleetmaster Danik who settled it. In the blunt way Danik settled most things. He pulled up the visual of the human fleet at the border and pointed at it. "Count them," he said. Someone started to. "Do not actually count them," Danik said. "My point is that you cannot. There are too many. And those are the ones they sent in 31 days from volunteers. That," he jabbed a finger at the display, "is not a military operation. That is a species that decided collectively on their own, without being ordered to get in whatever they had available and come here. You cannot negotiate with momentum. You cannot outflank a decision that 3 million individual beings made independently." He sat down. "We negotiate." Drex opened communications with Admiral General Okafor. The negotiations lasted 9 days. I will not pretend they were pleasant. Okafor was not unpleasant. She was, in fact, scrupulously professional, which Drex found almost harder to deal with than hostility would have been. Hostility he understood. The measured, documented, precisely worded accounting of exactly what the Vorrkai had done and exactly what was being demanded in return was something else. Something that required sitting across from the full weight of it without the comfortable distance of enemy aggression. The collective's negotiating team made several attempts to reframe the Ferron-7 strike as a territorial misunderstanding. Okafor let them finish each time, waited a beat, and then placed another piece of documentation on the table. Transmission logs. Structural analysis of the base confirming it held no military hardware of consequence. Personnel records, names, the cook Drex had heard about. The 3 people on their first off-world posting. After the 4th time this happened, Drex's lead negotiator, a diplomat named Chevrak who had handled 60 acquisitions and had never once sweated through his membrane in a conference room, quietly requested a recess and spent it standing in a corridor not speaking to anyone. On the 7th day, something happened that was not in the negotiating agenda. A message arrived from the forward cluster of the human fleet. Not from Okafor's command ship, from one of the civilian vessels, a mid-sized craft with Peller Mining Consortium markings, green and orange, sitting near the middle of the formation. The message was addressed not to the collective's diplomatic team, but specifically to Admiral Drex, by name. It was from Brecka Volund. She did not threaten. She did not demand. She said, in the same translation protocol the convoy had heard at the start of all this, that she had a question. Just one. She wanted to know why. Not legally, not politically. Why had they looked at Ferron-7, at 260 people doing their jobs on a moon, and decided they did not matter enough to warn, enough to give a chance? Drex sat with that message for a long time. He did not have a good answer. He had the answer he had given himself at the time. Protocol, resource acquisition, standard procedure, minimal resistance expected. He could construct the logic of it perfectly. What he could not do, and this was new, was construct a justification for it that did not collapse the moment he put a name on any single one of the 243 dead. He wrote back. It took him 4 drafts. He sent the 4th one, which was the shortest, which said only that there was no answer that was sufficient, and that he understood that. Brecka Volund did not reply. He had not expected her to. On the 9th day, an agreement was reached. The Vorrkai Collective formally acknowledged the attack on Ferron-7. The first time in recorded history the collective had issued a formal acknowledgement of fault to any species. Reparations were structured over a 12-year schedule, directed to the families of those killed and to the reconstruction of human infrastructure in the Peller system. The collective withdrew all claims to Peller territories. A joint oversight commission was established, humans and Vorrkai both, to govern any future resource negotiations in the region. It was, by the standard of most galactic conflict resolutions, remarkably clean. No additional shots fired. No additional lives lost after that first terrible 11 minutes. The human fleet began to disperse on the day the agreement was signed. It took almost as long to leave as it had to arrive. All those different vessels, different colors, different speeds, heading back to wherever they had come from. Drex watched the dispersal on his tactical display from his command quarters. The way the formation dissolved not with military precision, but with the gradual scatter of people who had come because they wanted to and were now going home. He watched until the last civilian transponder winked out of sensor range. Sovan found him there, 2 hours later, still at the display. The expansion command wants to discuss the revised protocol for first contact resource assessment, Sovan said. There is significant interest in updating the evaluation criteria. I imagine there is, Drex said. Several of the younger commanders are framing it as a tactical recalibration, learning from this engagement to avoid similar complications in the future. Drex was quiet for a moment. Is that what we are calling it? Sovan made the gesture that was the Vorrkai equivalent of a shrug, a slow rotation of the upper limbs that conveyed a universe of weary pragmatism. It is what makes it easier to implement the changes without requiring anyone to say the harder thing out loud. What is the harder thing? That we looked at a species we did not understand, decided they did not constitute a meaningful threat, and killed 243 of them for minerals. Sovan paused. And that the reason we are now renegotiating 11,000 years of expansion protocol is not because we developed a moral objection to that approach. It is because one of them owned a freight hauler and knew how to use a wrench. Drex turned from the display for the first time. You think we learned the wrong lesson. I think, Sovan said carefully, that we learned a lesson. I am not yet certain it is the right one. The right one would have been learned before Ferron-7. What we learned after is something different, something smaller and more embarrassing. The expansion push was formally suspended 14 months later. Not cancelled. The collective does not cancel things, we suspend them and add qualifications. But the practical effect was identical. No new acquisition operations were approved in any system where an established spacefaring species held presence, however modest that presence appeared. New assessment criteria were drafted. They were considerably longer than the old ones. They included, for the first time in Vorrkai procedural history, a section titled Non-Military Response Capacity, which attempted to quantify what a species could do if motivated, as opposed to what its standing military could do on a Tuesday afternoon. The section was, everyone agreed, extremely difficult to apply to humans, because the answer kept coming back as more than you want to find out. Commander Valis was reassigned to administrative duties. She did not fight the reassignment. I am told she spent a great deal of her subsequent career working on the Oversight Commission, the joint one with the humans, and that she was regarded by her human counterparts as unusually thorough and unusually quiet. Admiral Drex retired 3 years after Ferron-7. He gave no public address. He filed no memoir with the collective archives. The only thing he left in the official record was an amendment to the original strike authorization, his own document, his own 40-minute approval, with a single annotation added to the personnel assessment section, the part that had described the Ferron-7 garrison as minimal resistance non-critical. The annotation said, "Names matter. Get the names first." And Brecka Volund, freight hauler, sister, the woman who had retrofitted a cargo ship in 12 days and parked it in front of 2 Vorrkai warships with the calm of someone who had decided exactly what she was willing to do and was no longer interested in discussing it. She went back to Peller, back to the 2nd and 3rd moons, back to hauling construction materials between them, which is what she had been doing before any of this happened. The Peller Mining Consortium put a small marker at the edge of the Ferron-7 site while the reconstruction was underway. Just a flat panel with 243 names on it, including the cook and the 3 first-timers, and the base commander Osei Tamboli, who had stayed at his post until the end. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic. Brecka visited it once, alone, before the new base was finished. We know because one of the collective's observation satellites, the the ones that stayed on station during the treaty monitoring period, picked up a single heat signature at the site. Just one human, standing in the cold and the quiet of a moon that smelled of regolith and old smoke, for about 40 minutes. The satellite recorded it as a non-event. Nothing happening, just a person, standing still. I have reviewed that recording more times than I should probably admit. There is something in those 40 minutes, in the particular stillness of a being standing in a place where something terrible happened, not performing grief, not making demands, not doing anything that requires a response, that I find I cannot explain in 11,000 years of Vorrkai analytical language. We have a new saying now. It does not involve nests or insects. It goes, before you decide something does not matter, find out what it loves. We learned it from a freight hauler from Peller. We should have known it already.